meeting is being recorded. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SIG Network Policy API meeting, which is sponsored by CNCF. So let's follow the code of conduct and be nice to each other. Today we have not a big agenda. So if you have something else you'd like to talk about, please feel free to add. I wanted to share two updates with some new use cases that I've got. So first of all, that's an ingress CIDR rule use case. And we had an NPAP for it here, which is linked. It was actually closed because it became stale because no one worked on it. So I'm planning to get back to that and reopen it. So the use case that we have now, we struggled with figuring out how the traffic should ingress the cluster at all. So it's pretty difficult to specify a source IP matching for ingress rules for external traffic. But there is actually some platform may explicitly support preserving source IP of the incoming traffic, potentially even without using gateway API or anything like that. And in that case, source IP matching may make sense. I have actually a real use case from customers who do host their applications both outside the cluster and in the cluster, and they want the connections between those applications to be secured by network policy, and they need to use source IP matching for connections that are coming from external sources to the cluster. And there is a specific mode that actually allows you to preserve source IP for that. So that's why it can potentially work. And they have been actually using that with network policies for a long time because network policies do allow such matching. And they were pretty disappointed that admin network policy doesn't have it yet. So that's a TLDR of this update. I will reopen this NPAP that's linked here. And if any of you have any more use cases around that or maybe any questions, now is a good time to ask them, or you can always comment in the pull request.
So are you saying you're adding CIDR matches to admin network policy that wasn't there before?
For ingress, it was not. So we only added it for egress because that makes sense, you know, what IP you're trying to reach. But for ingress, it's a bit more complicated because we don't know how exactly the traffic reached the pod at all, considering it's coming from the outside.
Yeah. Calico has modes where we preserve the incoming source IP as well. So that's something our users find useful.
That's great to know.
Specifically, our BPF mode can preserve the source IP, like when you're doing node ports or what have you.
Yeah, I think that's also a similar use case to mine. So that actually makes sense. So maybe at least having this mode, we could try to document that in case a platform provides a way to preserve source IP, I guess this use case makes more sense immediately.
Yeah, and I think the other case is just if you're not coming into the cluster via a service, like if you've somehow peered your fabric with the cluster. So Calico supports BGP peering, and people do it in different ways. Like a lot of the cloud providers give you a native IP address in the for your pods. So pods have native IP addresses in GKE or in EKS or what have you. Then you can access the pod directly if you go that way, and then it makes sense as well. So it's not applicable if you have too many layers of NAT. Well, if you have a layer of NAT in front of your pods for ingress, but there's quite a few cases where it does make sense. I think if you can preserve the source IP, or if you have a native IP on whatever fabric you're running on, then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. And that actually is good to know that different solutions have these modes that were developed. So it probably means people need to use them. And yeah, Mike, you have a nice example in the chat there. let's also summarize that all in the NPAP. And then maybe we struggled before with just explaining how exactly traffic even ended up there. And if we can guarantee that source IP was even preserved, maybe it was changed, like we do not really control that on the network policy level. So let's clarify all the cases where it actually does make sense. So that's great to know. And it's also nice to get back to work with this NPAP that got a bit stale, but hopefully we'll get more alive soon. All right, anything else on that point, or should I move on? All right, so next one to resurrect, hopefully, tenancy. Still fairly tricky. This NPAP is not closed due to being stale yet. I've also got a new request from a user that actually also made me rethink the some of the details already outlined in that NPAP. So we need to get back to it. It's somewhere here. We may need to first update or maybe redefine, add, remove, I don't know, user stories that are listed here, because this NPAP was actually merged with all the user stories already. But then when we get to the API, we figured out that our user stories are not specific enough, or maybe not understood the same way by everyone. So that's why I'll split this PR into 2 commits. Maybe I'll even have a separate PR just to clarify user stories first. We'll see. So we need to make sure it makes sense. And then, yeah, we'll see which option is reasonable. Please take a look at this NPAP, leave your comments. We have discussed that different aspects of it a couple times during this meeting already. I have tried to keep the most important arguments there in the NPAP itself. So hopefully it explains some of the decisions and alternatives that you can find there. And so the easiest use case actually that I have is fairly simple. People want to select, but still contradict with the previous use cases we had actually, because it would not be possible. But they would like to select namespaces with a special label, which just is set for all namespaces that implement some functionality, maybe a big big application or something like that. And which is a kind of obvious thing, they want same namespace matching to allow same namespace and then deny everything else. And the most obvious label to do same namespace matching is this default label which is set by Kubernetes. So what that means is that the namespaces that are selected for the tenancy, this label is not the same label that should be used to split all tenancy namespaces into tenants, because the tenant is based on a different namespace label. And considering it is already set, I think it's a very natural and simple use case for most people, but it actually was not accounted for before in our use cases, because we mostly discussed like using the same label to select everything that should be considered, that should be affected by tenancy, and to split all these namespaces into tenants, it was supposed to be the same label or set of labels. And in this case, it's not the same. So yeah, as I said, probably I'll try to add this use case into the user stories list.
I just make sure I understand what you're saying. Is it the idea that you would sort of have you would have one label which is like a namespace type, and that would be set to namespace type equals tenant namespace, and then your separation of tenants would be done on like tenant name, which is a separate, or just the namespace name magic label?
Yeah, it's actually even more.
Idea?
Yeah, exactly. It's even, what you're saying is even more generic. So in this case, it's like really specific. There is a set of namespaces that is managed by, well, something. They implement some common functionality and they all have this one label, which also makes sure that we do not select system namespaces or any namespaces that we do not control or do not care about. And then all they want is just use same namespace, allow same namespace, meaning that they could apply an extra label for tenancy specifically that would be different for every namespace to do that. but you could use an existing Kubernetes name label for that
Gotcha.
to split
So
them.
like, say they're using like Argo to deploy a load of namespaces, and Argo has already put a label on saying this is an Argo deployed namespace, and
Yes,
they just want to piggyback on a label that's already there. Gotcha.
exactly. And it honestly makes a lot of sense to me. Like we don't want to force customers to apply lots of different labels just to make admin network policy work. Let's say it's actually really nice to reuse existing labels that are already well maintained. So yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think also Sean said that he will provide some more use cases soon. So that also probably will, yeah, then probably it makes even more sense to reiterate on the use cases first and make sure we cover everything we need. And then we'll get back to the painful discussions about priorities and selectors and what's the best way to do that in ANP.
I went to have another look at the doc, and I was finding it hard to sort of improve on the use cases, but I just feel like I have a slightly different take on it, of not the kind of like the use cases that you would get out of a user, where they just kind of give you quite a vague thing about what they want to do, but then the ideas that I have for how it should interact with other features, I kind of struggle to express that in a use case without just making things up. So I'm yeah, trying to think about that.
Exactly the same here. And that's kind of what we've done, I think, anyway. So just if you see there is something that you think makes sense but is not covered in the use cases, still let's discuss that. Maybe we'll figure out some existing use case that someone heard about. And I should say, like, getting this very real use case with a very specific deployment type and all the details did take quite some time, and it's not really easy. So that's
I think
potentially a rare case.
there's a lot of value in collecting all those really simple use cases like that. Just like here's a user story, like a simple user story of I want to do this and I want to do that, and there's a lot of value in those, because then you can go back and test all the ideas you have against it. But yeah, I think the thing, the main thing that was tripping me up is I kind of feel like, as much as possible, we should favor the tenancy and the admin network policy being kind of, is orthogonal the right word? I feel like the administrator should be able to choose what they think is important. That feels like, as an admin, I might want the admin network policy to be prioritized ahead of the tenancy, or I might want the opposite, just depending on the scenario and what I'm doing. So I can make up use cases that capture those two scenarios, but I'm just kind of making them up. It's not that a customer has specifically come to me and said, I need this, and a different one has come and said, oh, I need that. I just have this feeling that there should be a kind of, it seems likely that people will want to override whatever we do with specific exceptions, or they'll want to just defer to it, or I just feel like they'll want to do all those things, but actually finding a customer who wants to do the specific thing is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think it's still useful, even if it's you, like, quote unquote, making up the use cases, right? Let's still discuss them. We actually tried to do that with the previous set of use cases anyway, and we usually try
Yeah.
to figure out if there is like an alternative way of implementing the same functionality, but maybe without allowing some exceptions, as you said, or like setting extra fields. So maybe we'll find out that even these potential use cases still can be implemented with a reasonable amount of fields. But I would say this is one of the first very real examples from a very real customer. All the other things we like have to make up, because there are just these super simple use cases coming with very specific requirements, and then we cannot just design an API based on one
Yeah.
use case, unfortunately. So we have to assume some things around that and make some things up, and then maybe by just sharing our experiences about what we know about how people tend to design their network policies, what we've heard, maybe we can come up hopefully with some reasonable API.
I think
That
you
will work
already
for
have
more
it
than one.
captured, or I was finding it hard to find a different way of saying it. But I've definitely had a couple of users come to me, either a GitHub issue or a customer come, and they've just been trying to do the simple, very similar to what you just described. They want a way to automatically separate a group of namespaces and have default deny in this group of namespaces, but have the namespace be able to, I think everything within the namespace talk to each other by default, but communication between namespaces blocked by default. I think that's captured as one of the use cases, but that one's come up several times in a concrete way, and users often suggest that they want the kind of same label, not same label kind of selector. But I think we have to be careful about that for all the reasons that we've discussed before. So definitely the simple case. The approach of having groups of namespaces associated with a tenant, I quite like that. But I'm not sure if that was motivated by a concrete user ask. I don't think I've had that one come from our users, but like they might not have thought it through enough to come up with that.
Oh, I actually have that from a real user. There
Yeah.
was, I don't know if it's captured like with special terms in the NPAP, but it was around like security zones concept.
Yeah.
Which means that there are different like namespaces that just have the same security access level or something like that, and then there is just yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
So that's a kind of tenant definition in that case.
And certainly with what I tend to think of as the OpenShift model of deploying applications, where everything's very like disaggregated into lots of small namespaces, like in that way, like having like tenants be a single namespace would be very like counter to the way like OpenShift emphasizes doing things.
And not just to OpenShift really, because users already have their idea of how they want to split their applications into namespaces. And then when they just want tenancy on top of that, I don't think we want to come and say, oh, now all your 5 namespaces that you had, they just need to be one namespace because that's the only way to have tenancy.
Yeah,
They're not going to be
I think
happy
that
about that.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll plus one from the mesh perspective of like, yeah, we've definitely seen people organize their services in both models.
What's more important is to make sure there is no third model we're missing, but hopefully it's good enough for now.
I think the modular tenancy structure is flexible enough to accommodate any way that I've seen. So.
Okay, that's definitely good enough. Right, so I mean, in this case, we'll definitely have to make some part of guessing and maybe figuring out the use cases that make sense. Yeah. So let's try to continue working on that, and maybe by the next meeting we'll have some updates. Yeah, just leave comments in these 2 linked NPAPs, the one which I will hopefully update soon. All right, so that's it in our agenda for today. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Can I ask a quick question on admin network policy? I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I just wanted to double check. If you have admin network policies, and the admin network policy selects a particular pod, but the traffic doesn't match any of the rules, there's not meant to be any implicit behavior, right? There's no implicit drop. That's
Yes, and that's the best part about it, admin network policy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. We're working on our implementation, and I think we've accidentally got an implicit drop, and I was just
Oh, I can see how it happens after many years working with network policy.
I think the spec maybe mentions it in a bit of an oblique way, or it sort of says it talks about explicit policy maybe, but if you're coming at it from a position like having done the other style of policy, then it doesn't kind of it didn't resonate well enough or something. Yeah, anyway, but yeah, I thought that was it. I just thought I'd check with you guys that nothing had changed.
Yeah, for now it's like that, and I think we try to just not make all the documents about ANP too focused on that's what's different from network policy and what we fixed kind of style. We just try to approach that as a new API that we are designing. So yeah, I guess maybe that's some of the warnings may not be obvious enough.
Yeah, it's just when you map it into Calico's model, we actually need a new feature to not do the implicit drop, because we do it by default in line with Kubernetes policy. So yeah, just thanks for confirming that.
Sure. All right, anything else? Okay, well, then I think let's make sure to update all these NPAPs with the comments and use cases for the following 2 weeks, and we'll see what kind of update we'll have on our next meeting. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, y'all.